Why NCIS has no choice but to force McGee out of MCRT. What if Timothy McGee's time in MCRT isn't just evolving, but quietly coming to an end? Because when you really step back and look at everything happening in NCIS right now, the leadership shakeups, the emotional rewriting of McGee's past, and the way the story keeps pushing him into bigger responsibilities, it starts to feel less like simple character growth and more like preparation for a transition that can't be avoided. And the real question becomes whether NCIS is slowly positioning McGee to leave MCRT, even if the show hasn't said it directly yet. Now, nothing about McGee becoming director is officially confirmed, but NCIS has always been careful with how it builds leadership changes. It never happens suddenly. It happens through slow repositioning, through subtle narrative pressure, and through long-term character restructuring. And right now, McGee is being shaped in a very specific direction. Not rushed, not dramatic, but inevitable. He's already one of the most experienced members of the entire agency. He has survived multiple eras of NCIS, from Gibbs to Vance to Parker, and each shift has quietly elevated his importance. Even former leadership decisions hinted that McGee had something beyond field potential, not necessarily because he demanded power, but because he represents something NCIS values deeply: stability. And stability is what agencies rely on when everything else starts to change. But here's where the contradiction begins. McGee no longer fits the simple structure of MCRT. He's not the probie anymore. He's not even just the seasoned field agent. He's now the longest-serving active member of the team, and that alone creates a narrative problem the show has to solve eventually. Because MCRT is not designed for long-term permanence. It's designed for constant action, constant field pressure, and constant adaptability. And McGee over time has started shifting away from that core identity. He's becoming more strategic, more leadership-focused, and more involved in the bigger structure of the agency rather than just the field operations. And in NCIS storytelling, that kind of shift usually signals one thing: a character being prepared for a role change, not just development. The uncomfortable truth is that keeping McGee in MCRT forever actually limits the story. He's too important to replace easily, but also too developed to stay static. And that creates a narrative deadlock. If he stays, his arc risks becoming repetitive. If he moves up, the team dynamic breaks. If he gets replaced, fans push back hard. So the show does what it always does in situations like this. It slowly expands his world beyond the team instead of removing him outright. And that's where things start to feel intentional, especially after the death of director Leon Vance. Because Vance wasn't just a leader, he was the structure holding NCIS together. His death didn't just create emotional impact, it created a power vacuum. And in storytelling terms, a vacuum always needs to be filled. McGee, because of his experience, intelligence, and emotional grounding, naturally fits into that gap. But NCIS doesn't promote based on emotional logic. It promotes based on necessity. And necessity often forces change whether characters are ready or not. So even if McGee feels like the perfect candidate, the system itself may eventually push him out of MCRT simply because the agency is rebuilding itself from the top down. And while all of this is happening, there are smaller signals too, like the return of supporting characters such as Curtis Hubley. On the surface, it looks like a simple guest appearance, but structurally, it serves a bigger purpose. It shows that NCIS is quietly preparing flexible support systems, characters who can rotate in and out as the core team evolves. Because if McGee eventually moves into leadership, the show will need operational balance without immediately locking in a permanent replacement. Rotating familiar faces allows that transition to feel natural instead of disruptive. And then there's the most personal shift of all: McGee's long-hidden son. This isn't just a plot twist, it's a turning point in his entire character arc. For almost 2 decades, McGee has been defined by loyalty to MCRT. The team has been his emotional anchor, his professional identity, and his stability. But now, suddenly, he has another life pulling him in a completely different direction: fatherhood. And that changes everything. Because now McGee is no longer just balancing duty to the team. He's balancing duty to a child he never knew existed. And those two responsibilities don't naturally coexist in a high-intensity field unit forever. Eventually, something has to give. And that's why this storyline matters so much. not because of the shock value, but because of what it does to McGee's long-term direction. When you connect all of it, the leadership vacuum, the structural instability at NCIS, McGee's growing authority, his evolving personal life, and the subtle repositioning away from field dependence, a clear pattern begins to form. NCIS isn't forcing McGee out aggressively. It's gently shifting his entire identity away from MCRT, not through one big moment, but through a series of quiet, irreversible changes. And that leads to the real conclusion. McGee doesn't get removed from MCRT in a dramatic way. He outgrows it, the system evolves, the team evolves, and eventually he becomes something the team can't fully contain anymore. Because in NCIS, the longest surviving characters don't stay where they started, they move forward, whether the audience is ready or not.